I hope that you've had a great start to your new year. If you're with us this past Sunday at Madison, Brandon and I kicked off a brand new series called You Have Called Me Higher, a study on the book of James. And the reason why we picked the book of James and the reason why we picked that title is because we know during this time of year, people have a lot of different goals, resolutions, plans for themselves to become something better, maybe with themselves or maybe for their family. And so knowing that that's fresh on people's minds, we thought, well, no better book to deal with those practical things that we want to achieve or get better at in our life than the book of James. People even called the book of James the book of practical Christianity. And so we decided, since that's fresh on people's minds, let's couple this book that God has given us and use this together to help us become what God wants us to become. But the reason why we picked the title, You Have Called Me Higher, is that one thing that we all know that we struggle with is at times just falling victim to maybe the status quo, just kind of breezing through life, not having maybe high expectations for ourselves. But God has called us to a higher life, because He wants us to experience life to the fullest, but also because He wants everybody around us to experience life to the fullest too. And just as we sang in that song that we could just wait, we could just sit, but His promises are out there for the taking. He's called us to this higher life. And James, he speaks to that, because the faith that we have within us, that God has given us, that means because He's with us, there is no such thing as an ordinary Christian. That we are all special in God's eyes, designed to do higher things, to do big things. And so one of the things that we were thinking about, knowing that we're going to dig into this book, is some of you might remember a few years ago, Jason and several of the other ministers put together this book. It's a study guide on the book of James. And it is an awesome resource and study guide. And as you go through it, you'll notice there's a lot of different discussion questions and different things and thoughts on the book of James. And while this book doesn't necessarily match with our series lesson for lesson, everything that's covered in this book is going to be covered in the lessons that we present over the next several weeks on this series, You Have Called Me Higher. And so we encourage you and your family to go to the foyer and look at the Welcome Center. There's a book to pick this up. And each night, go through this study guide. It'll help you to join with us in this study on the book of James, but also it'll create a context for good questions and discussions for you and your family to enjoy together. So if you're with us Sunday, we opened up James chapter 1 and looked in verses 1 through 4, where James starts the book in a very heavy way by talking about trials. And as we talked about, this was a group of people that were scattered. They were dispersed. And so they had experienced a lot of trials. They had experienced a lot of difficulty, pointing back to the persecutions that they had experienced or were maybe even fleeing. And so he first starts by talking about trials. And one of the things that we talked about in this series to kick it off was how to view our trials in a different way. That in this text, in verses 2 through 4, he talks about how trials, they can prove your faith and they can grow your maturity. That trials through prayer, when we handle it with prayer and coming before God, it can break our pride. And trials can grow our maturity. And trials can also help equip us to comfort others when they too are going to go through a difficult season. But then we end it with how trials can draw us closer to God. And so every single person is going through something. And as we talked about from the book yesterday, going on a bear hunt, you can't go over it. You can't go under it. Oh no, you have to go through it. That we're all going to go through something. And so we can't have a contingency plan for if things go wrong. We have to have a contingency plan for when things go wrong. And that's where our faith and the power and the promises of God meet. And so as we concluded the series yesterday, what I wanted to remind you of is that knowing that we all are going to go through trials, how can we handle those trials in a higher way that James talks about here? And of course, we talked about prayer. That prayer not being the last resort, but the first choice that we choose. Looking to the providence of God, knowing and looking for the way He provides, and also understanding and holding in our heart the promises of God. And then we also talked about understanding that perseverance and the need for patience. That word perseverance here in the book of James means staying power. That even when things are under pressure, even when things are difficult, staying because we know the power and the presence of God. But being patient to see those things through. I hope that you guys have a great week, and we can't wait to continue this series with you over the next few weeks, and we hope that it's a blessing for you as you start your new year.